Live transcriptioning has been enabled. You can turn it on or off using the live transcript feature. You can change the view of what you're seeing by clicking on the view button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We recommend the speaker view. At the close of the presentation, I will be putting in an assessment survey in the chat box. Please fill out the survey after each session you attend. It helps us make every conference better, so your feedback is greatly appreciated. Lightning rounds run a little bit differently than other sessions. We will do all 3 lightning rounds in a row and then have questions at the end. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I will keep track of them and we will ask in the order that they are posted. I am gonna share my screen. All right, so I am happy to present our lightning round talks. We've got Bruce Wardlow first talking about free to listen, free to learn podcasts as free educational resources. Then Sierra Whitfield will be doing a crash course in fair use. And in round 3, Daniel Zhao will be doing an AI deep research and library scholarly guidance, a case study. With that, I will pass it on to Bruce to take it away.
Okay, thank you. My name is Bruce Wardlow. I am the Systems and Emerging Technologies Librarian at Cornett Library at West Texas A&M University. And this is an abbreviated version of a presentation that I gave to some faculty and some students about a subject that kind of popped up that a lot of us really weren't aware of. And essentially what happened is we have a educational leadership EDD program here at WT. And one of the professors in that program came to me looking for basically an OER resource to replace a book that he used in his class. And we looked through and we looked through, and there just wasn't any OER alternative. And then, we kind of started desperately throwing things out there. And one of the things that we found is Gail had a link to a podcast for essentially the book he wants to read, or an interview with the author of the book he wants his students to read with actual school administrators. And we kind of looked at each other and said, I didn't know we had podcasts in our collection. And after going through and speaking with a lot of our other librarians here, they didn't know we had podcasts in the collection. I mean, none of us knew we had podcasts in the collection. So if you leave my quick little chat here with nothing else, go and try to see what podcasts you have in your collection because podcasts are quite popular and we have them apparently. Slide, please. So why use podcasts? Podcasts are typically free. They're typically done by subject matter experts. And they're one of the ways that professionals stay informed about the issues and advances in our professions. In fact, at least twice a week, my boss emails me podcasts that she found saying, hey, this is a really interesting podcast. Some of them are on topic for instruction, some of them are on topic for librarianship. But podcasts really are becoming a typical way for experts to communicate with other experts. Slide, please. Now, it's important to identify if you're going to use a podcast in any sort of instructional capacity, who your intended audience of the podcast is. Because there are some podcasts written out there for mass audiences meant to be understood easily, and you've got the podcast host doing a lot of the heavy lifting of translating what the expert is saying into something simpler for our students. This is great for introductory classes, but it's not necessarily necessary for advanced classes. So instead, those you might want to find a podcast that's really niche, that's for experts by experts, that cuts out a lot of the interpretation, a lot of the definitions, and actually really is incredibly focused on what you want to talk to. So these are great for upper level and advanced classes. The podcast I mentioned earlier that sort of prompted all of this was this particular variety of podcasts. Slide, please. So, how do you find podcasts? Now, this is the problem when it comes to podcasts and librarianship. Very few of our discovery services are set up well for podcasts, and very little of the metadata actually identifies a podcast as a podcast. So, my recommendation on that one is instead of trying to find the podcast through any sort of library search, find the podcast that you're looking for, then try to find it in the actual search or check to see if they are openly licensed. Now, there's podcasts everywhere, YouTube, Spotify. Well, YouTube has a Creative Commons filter. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and most podcast websites don't. So if you are interested in actually saving that podcast and using it and redistributing it, then start your podcast search on YouTube. Otherwise, a lot of the time, just go for the Google. Spotify is another one, great one. But if you are looking for license information, go to the podcast website. Most podcasts have websites, and most of them will tell you if there is any sort of license or who you need to speak to for permissions to use that podcast. Next slide, please. Now, ProQuest does have a filter for blogs, podcasts, and websites. I don't recommend using this filter because it will give you all kinds of different results. Instead, if you're looking for a podcast on ProQuest, and a lot of the podcasts that we have here at WT are actually through ProQuest, through all of our global news stream and all of our newspaper related things. Instead, there's a document type for audio video clip. If you're looking for a podcast, select that audio type filter, and that will actually help you much more in trying to find a podcast in ProQuest. Next slide, please. Gale Power Search also has a podcast filter, and that one is, quite useful because it just finds things that it has identified as podcasts. And I will warn you though, whereas on ProQuest's global news stream, the podcasts are hosted by ProQuest itself. Within Gale, most of the time, the podcast is not hosted by ProQuest. Instead, it's a link to NPR, which can be very useful. However, uh, anytime there is a link to a podcast outside of one of our library databases, it is more likely to change based on any number of different factors. Next slide, please. So, can you post a podcast on an LMS such as Canvas or Blackboard? So, if it's if you can find it on a library source, then you can post the link to that library source on your LMS, but you don't want to download it and then re-upload it to your LMS because that's redistribution and it's getting into some licensing issues. If it's a publicly available source, which the vast majority of podcasts are, you can't redistribute without permission. So if you want to upload it to your LMS directly, you need to go get permission. Otherwise, you can just post a link. However, with that, depending on advertisers or copyright stuff or any number of different things, the library sources are going to be the most stable. Publicly available sources are probably going to be the least stable. And then if it's an openly licensed resource, and surprisingly few podcasts that I've found are actually openly licensed, which is why I said free educational resource, not open educational resource. There are some, however, that are out there that are openly licensed, and those you can download and upload to your LMS and redistribute freely. Next slide, please. So there is an accessibility consideration if you are ever recommending transcripts for any sort of instruction or recommending podcasts for any sort of instruction, and that is going to be your transcripts. Now, the vast majority of podcast hosting sites have transcripts. Like Spotify, almost all of their podcasts have a transcript. A lot of the Apple podcasts do as well. Sometimes you'll actually have to go to the actual website for the podcast to get the transcripts. Sometimes not. This is an example of the transcript that they have for one of the, I think, Wall Street Journal podcasts, or sorry, New York Times podcasts on ProQuest. So It's important for accessibility. Podcasts are great. Just make sure there's a transcript. Next slide, please. If you can't find the transcript, look for the podcast on a different platform. The A lot of the time, a different platform will have it. You can upload the podcast to a transcription site. I've not really played with many of those, but some of them are getting quite impressive. Um, you can use a student worker or graduate assistant transcribe the podcast, or you can reach out to Student Disability Services if there is a specific identified need for a transcript in a podcast. So, next slide, please. I believe. Yeah, that is the end of my little lightning round there. We are going to be doing questions at the end. So if you have any questions, go ahead and hold them for just a little bit, and then we will talk about them later. And so I will pass this back to our host.
And I will pass it to Sierra. Thank you very much, Bruce.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Sierra Whitfield, and I am the copyright librarian here at Texas A&M Universities. So in the next few minutes, I want to demystify something that touches nearly every educator, researcher, librarian, and creative professional. And that mysterious something is called fair use. Next. Fair use is a critical tool that allows us to use small portions of copyrighted materials without needing permission from the copyright holder. But it's often misunderstood, and honestly, it's a little bit intimidating, especially if you're encountering this legal doctrine for the very first time. But at its core, fair use is all about balance. It allows us to borrow just enough to serve a new, meaningful purpose, things like teaching, commentary, criticism, or scholarship, while still respecting the original creator's rights. So let's take a quick look at how it works and how you can use it responsibly, especially in educational settings. But before we continue, I have to make my obligatory I am not a lawyer statement. So here we go. I am not a lawyer, and this should not be considered legal advice. If you do need legal advice, then be sure to consult a qualified attorney or intellectual property lawyer. Next. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the law behind fair use. So fair use is a part of the US copyright law, specifically Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. That section says that for purposes like criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research, the use of copyrighted work may not count as infringement. But this is the key. Fair use isn't automatic. You don't simply get a free pass just because you're in a classroom or you're teaching a course. To decide whether something qualifies as fair use, the court generally considers four factors, and they weigh them together. So these aren't checkboxes or a standard formula. They're more like pieces of a puzzle, and you have to take a look at the big picture. So let's walk through each one. Next. Next. So our first factor is the purpose and the character of the use. So this is often considered the most important factor. Here, courts look at two main things. The first is the use transformative? So that means, are you doing something new with the material? Are you adding new meaning, new expression, or a new purpose? If you're just copying and pasting without changing the context or intent, then that counts against fair use. But if you're using a clip to critique a film or quoting a passage in a paper to analyze its meaning, then that's transformative. That's good. A good example here comes from the Supreme Court case Campbell v. Acuff Rose, where the court ruled that parody, which would fall under a form of criticism, is transformative, even if the parody borrows heavily from the original work. And then the second question that courts ask would be whether the use is commercial or non-commercial. So uses for education, research, or scholarship usually weigh in favor of fair use, especially if they're nonprofit. Next. Our next factor is the nature of the copyrighted work. So this factor looks at the type of work that you're using. So factual or nonfiction works are more likely to be fair use than highly creative ones like novels, films, or music. And this is because the law gives more protection to works that involve artistic expression rather than facts. Also, if a work is unpublished, it generally gets more protection. Authors have the right to decide when and how their work is first made public. So using an unpublished material can count against fair use, unless there's a very strong justification for it. Next. The third factor is the amount and substantiality of the portion used. Here's where a lot of people generally ask, can I use 10% of this work, or is it okay to show 30 seconds to a minute of this clip? And the truth is, there is no magic number. There is no legally defined quantity for this factor. The law only says to use what is necessary to get your point across. So sometimes that might be a single sentence, and other times that might be a little bit more, especially in the case of audiovisual materials. But it is very important that you avoid using the heart of the work. And this is the part of the work that captures its essence. So a great example of this would be the line, "No, I am your father" from Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. That line is iconic. It's a huge spoiler, and using it in full might carry more weight than just its word count suggests. That said, there are edge cases where using an entire work might still be fair, like analyzing an entire image in an art history class, but that would be the exception and not the norm. Next. And finally, for our fourth factor, the effect on the market for the original work, courts ask, does your use harm the market for the original? And this includes existing markets, potential markets, as well as licensing markets. So if students can get everything that they need from your materials and no longer need to buy the original book, then that's a huge problem. Courts will look at whether your use might serve as a replacement for the original and whether it undermines the copyright holder's ability to profit. So one case that best illustrates this is Seuss Enterprises versus Comic Mix, where the courts ruled that the use of Dr. Seuss's work wasn't fair because it copied too much and could interfere with the original work's market. And in this case, it was potential derivative markets, and this again would be parody markets for Dr. Seuss works. Next. Now, let's talk about fair use in the academic setting, what's allowed, what's risky, and how to make informed choices whether you're teaching in person or online. So what's generally considered okay? So best practices suggest using, again, only as much of the work as is necessary for your educational purpose. So here are a few examples of an acceptable use. Quoting a paragraph from a short story or a chapter from a book to spark class discussion, using an article or a periodical or newspaper for analysis in a presentation or in a paper, showing a short film to examine themes or cinematography, displaying an image or a chart during a lecture, whether it's online or in person, to explain a concept. All of these are allowed, especially if it is integral to the lesson. But there are some lines that you shouldn't cross. And some examples would be using an entire book or posting an entire book to your course website or emailing it directly to your students. Emailing a full book file and not just the link would violate the copyright holder's distribution rights. So instead, post only what's necessary to your course through your institution's LMS system, such as a chapter, a key excerpt, or a brief clip. And if you plan to reuse this material in future terms, making it a staple resource for your course, you'll likely need to obtain formal permissions or licensing from the copyright holder after that first initial use. Streaming a full movie or sharing a commercial article without permission, or rather uploading that entire article as a PDF to your LMS homepage. Again, this one would be a no-go. In most cases, it's just best to link to the material from an authorized platform, like a streaming database or a publisher's website, rather than uploading or embedding it yourself. This ensures copyright is inspected and typically gives students access to the most up-to-date version. And the last would be using an item reproduced without its copyright notice. All copies must include the original copyright notice, and it should be in the same form as it is on the original work. Next. So in both physical and virtual classrooms, the key consideration is the purpose of your use. You should ask yourself, am I using this material to teach or comment on it, or am I simply sharing it for convenience? So here are some key considerations for the virtual classroom. The most important one would be access controls. Access controls is especially important in online environments. So using institutional tools like your school's LMS system or password protected platforms, especially links if you're talking about more streaming media, these help ensure that only your enrolled students, rather than, say, the general public, can access the material. So this setup mimics the limitations of a traditional classroom and strengthens your fair use argument. So the key takeaway here is appropriateness, not minimalism, is the standard. You don't have to use the smallest possible portion, but you should use only what's necessary to meet your educational goals. So avoid overuse and be ready to explain why the material that you've chosen is essential for teaching, not for entertainment or convenience. Next. Here are my sources and also just some great general sources if you're interested in learning more about copyright and fair use. Next. So to wrap up, fair use is not a formula, it is a judgment call. So you have to weigh the purpose, the nature of the work, how much you're using, and whether your use might hurt the market. So if your use is educational, transformative, limited in scope, and doesn't serve as a replacement for the original, you're probably in good shape. But when in doubt, either look for alternative materials like open educational resources or seek permission, especially if you plan to use the content repeatedly over time. So thanks for listening, and here's to making confident, informed, fair use choices that support the amazing work that you do every single day. Thank you.
Thank you, Sierra. It was fantastic. And last but not least, we've got Daniel with his case study. Take it away, Daniel.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Okay, I'm presenting a case study I did recently on AI deep research and library scholarly guidance. The background, over the past year or so, almost all the major AI systems began to offer deep research as an option. So deep research, other people also call it AI reasoning or deep reasoning. So I wonder what DR is. How is it, for example, how is it different from the regular basic chatbot like ChatGPT, or how is it different, or how is it related to the library research support tools the librarians are using, and what applications they might have? So the methodology, I selected 5 tools, and 2 of them are library tools, 1 Google overview, and 2 AI tools, and ask them the same question: how to tell if an article is scholarly, and then compare the answers. Next. So what is DR? I think the simplest way to describe it is probably a new workflow that thinks before responding. So with the topic, DR will break it down and search thoroughly in the web. So this means DR different from chatbot, like ChatGPT. It has real-time web access and not just relying on the pre-trained data. So while it's searching, while it's thinking, it will actually show its a thought process, or what is also called chain of thought, COT, and then at the end gave a long report with citations. So what I mean by library scholarly guidance. So what I mean is I refer to anything, any research support that ranging from face-to-face, web guides, or library classes. Next. Okay, let's first look at the first tool, the library FAQ. And this is from the library, Texas A&M University library website. It's really a short web page with 2 paragraphs and 4 checkpoints. And here, I list them here. And 1 research tool and 1 see also, which is a related, a similar, another FAQ page. And on this library FAQ page, it has no citations. Next. So this is the screenshot of Google overview. How can I tell if an article is scholarly? You can see it gave a 1 sentence overview. And it also mentioned 4 points, which are somewhat different from the FAQ's 4 points, but they are 4 points. And then also mentioned the same tool. But Google does cite, and 12 out of the 13 citations are actually from library websites. Next. Okay, let's look at the library guide. And this is from California State University Northridge Library website. I highlighted here. So as you can see, how can I tell if an article is scholarly? It's actually part 3 of a much longer guide. And from this answer, we can see it provides a lot more information than the FAQ one, and it actually has more checkpoints. So it actually has 9 checkpoints. It also mentioned the same tool. Again, it has no citations. Next. Okay, now let's look at the first AI, Perplexity. Let's look at the layout. So here's the deep research mode highlighted in red, and then it checked 37 sources, and then it went through 25 steps. And here's the first part, the top part of the report. Next. Okay, now let's look at the reasoning steps. 25 steps here, and let me read some of them. I found several resources outlining the key characteristics of scholarly articles. I have gathered comprehensive information from various academic sources that, okay, I need to figure out how to determine if an article is scholarly. And first, I look at the author's credentials, and next, the structure of the article. And next, the language is another clue, and peer review is crucial factor, etc. And so it just, as we can see here, and Perplexity DR obviously mimic human thinking, or rather librarian thinking here. So there are 25, it went through 25 steps, but then I consolidate them into 8 and look at the left side of the slide. So the first one is it's basically said, I'm planning to do this. It start its planning and start with the key characteristics. And then it has a long list of the article level indicators. It found out all that. And very interesting that I highlighted in red color, self-reflection. When he went through the peer review indicators, it actually came back. He said, wait a minute, I need to be cautious because not articles in peer review journals are peer reviewed. So it's just like self-reflection there and self-caution. And then it went on the list. And then also number 3 is article journal level indicator like database filters, etc. And then it also mentioned practical evaluation workflow for students, common pitfalls, and mitigation strategies, leveraging library support, and concluding a nice conclusion, and then as a follow-up. I put them in color codes because based on my own subject librarian experience, I think the main step, 1, 2, 3, are usually covered by library web guides, but actually the in blue 4 to 6 are usually the topics covered by library classes, information literacy classes, and then 7 and 8 are typically a very typical AI tools. It gives you a nice effective ending and then ask a follow-up. Next. So Perplexity 3, let's look at sources. Oh, it's not lined up here very well. So basically, and look at the first one, library guidelines, FAQs, 21, the total citation 37. In other words, the, the majority of the sources they cite is from library website and a few others from university writing centers and other publishers' website. Next. Okay, now this is the second AI tool, ChatGPT Deep Research. Look at again the layout. The Deep Research tool here, it actually has another reasoning mode. So it actually has two reasoning mode here. And by the way, I'm not a pro user and I don't have the full version of the pro capabilities. And what I see is limited use, and then I have the lightweight edition of ChatGPT DR. So it actually when I pose that question, how to tell if the library, how to tell article is scholarly, it actually asks for, oh, give me more context. I just gave a little bit more context, why I need to know this, and then it gave me the report. So it took about 6 minutes, which is much longer than Perplexity did. Perplexity probably generated that report about 1 minute, and ChatGPT took more than 6 minutes. It went on a lot more longer steps, 74. The sources number about the same, 33, and then give a report. And very typical ChatGPT structure writing style. Next. And this is the findings of the thinking step, the reasoning steps. So I have two screens here. And as you can see, it's, I'm crafting a guide doing this. I search for guide now. I'm examining this scholarly journals. I'm reading this particular library web guide. And interesting enough is that it's a very similar, again here, mimics human thinking. But in my impression, this report is not as comprehensive as the one did by Perplexity. Next. Okay, so let me see the tables. Yeah, this is the numbers by ChatGPT DR. As you can see, 22 out of 32 total are library guides or library AFIL pages. So so I just I want you to be aware that out of from the 22 citations, 8 from 8 guys. Next. Meaning they citing the same source multiple times. And through my case study, I just become aware that ChatGPT and Perplexity as well has a way to visualize their reasoning steps. And I have the prompt here. Next. Okay, finding summaries. This is the total numbers. I already mentioned them. Next. Okay, let me move the screen to another. Okay. Okay, let me just, this is, this is the discussion part.
Am I on the wrong slide?
No, because I'm putting on my screen a smaller screen. It's hard to read, but now let me go to my notes here. which is a lot bigger. Okay, the discussion, number one, DRs versus the basic chat mode. DR mode versus the basic chat mode. So I on that table I have two reasoning. I have two volumes of reasoning and non-reasoning. The non-reasoning mode relies on the pre-trained data, whereas the reasoning based DR relies heavily on the real web content. That's the first differences. And basic DR, basic chat is prompt driven. So knowing how to craft the prompts, how to provide the sufficient context is important. But the reasoning DR, it doesn't matter. It present a request. It will sometimes it will make some decisions what to look for, how to use it. And then another difference is the basic chat is let me see okay, the transparency part. Okay, the basic chat the basic chat you cannot see the operations behind, but DRs allow you to make the process transparent. And then the second, DR versus DR. And compared to reports, I found ChatGPT one cites only sources. The one done by Perplexity is more balanced and thorough academic style. But given the prominent status of ChatGPT, so I think ChatGPT DR should have a wider user case. That's my judgment. Depending what your project. But I think for research purposes, Perplexity is a very good one. I want to mention Gemini, which I don't have access to, and the other one, and they have a human in the loop. That meaning allow users to go into editing the reasoning steps. FAQ, how much time I have? Okay.
2 minutes.
Oh, 2 minutes. Okay. So that table, I put in that table all together, and you can see FAQ, and there's I see two parallel digital twins. So Library FAQ and Google Scholar providing fast answers. Library Guide and the users librarian think a lot, putting a lot into it, creating it, but the digital reasoning and will mimic the thinkings as well. And for the third point, the fourth point, and there's a quote from OpenAI is that DR is ideal for domains that would otherwise require a human expert like math. And I think this is exactly what librarians doing, align what. So librarian has the task to do a review, has the task and required librarians assistance. I think this is the it matched this model. Next. Okay, implications. As we can see, and the library web guides are constantly being repurposed to inform AI decisions, insights. And so the implication, let's publish more. So I list some scenarios we can leverage DRs using as mitigating tools, research tools, and development tools. For roles, I think DR will impacting us and the tools we're using. And currently, we are information gatekeepers. But in the future, we might be the human in the loop, feedback, or information validators. As for patrons, and they are passive learners, but now they are not anymore. Their future is already here, and they use AI and become critical users. And current AI is kind of an agentic or semi-agentic, follow human logics, but in the future, they may be a full agent and dependent for their own decisions. Next. While we explored, I want to conclude with this. While we explored innovative use of DR, and let's bear in mind that transparency may not be able to show all. There are studies indicate that, and also in visibility, it doesn't equal correctness or validity. And there are also studies that DR can still fabricate. And critical thinking is very important to look at evidence and present a counter argument. All those critical skills are very important. We should not leave to AI and too much and too often. And last word, I'll conclude. Let's continue publish. This is the only way and to keep librarianship vital and visible in the age of AI. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for our three presenters. Now is the time for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat, and I will relay them from the chat, and or you can ask your question. Kimberly?
I started to type my question, but then I figured it would probably just be easier to ask it out loud. This is a question for Zhao, and or Dr. Yi, Dr. Zhao
Yeah,
Yi.
yeah.
Sorry
Call me
about that.
Daniel.
Daniel,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, yes.
Um, so I've noticed recently that Google AI overviews have gotten much better. And I'm wondering if if you have a sense of why that is. So that's question one. I actually have a second question. Do you know what the relationship is between Google Gemini and the overviews?
Um, well, maybe the second one first, and then
Okay.
I think okay, first of all, I'm not a heavy Gemini user. I tested the basic version. I don't have the pro version yet. As I mentioned from the documentation that um, they actually, for their deep research mode, you can actually edit. The machine provides you, okay, here's what I generated, and look at it and to see what you need to add anything or drop out anything so that you can create a customized report. And this sounds very exciting. So that human in the loop feedback. So I'm really looking for, I haven't had the time to test it. Uh, I think Google overview, it basically is Google. But this is what I see. In the past, in the web time, uh, when you ask, when you search something in Google, but now you can ask question in Google. So it's somewhat different. So when you search in Google, Google return you with a bunch of links, right? No summary, nothing. It just return you with a bunch of links. So it's up to the user or the information seeker, and so it leaves the interpretation part for user and to do more work and all that. So now Google Overview goes a step further. So it actually provide a summary and something you can grab and it help you understand the context and everything. So I think this is I really think this is leading for something else. In the slide, I kind of rushed through it. So everyone is talking about agentic, autonomous. So I think this is the one. Um, this is the one probably in the near future will happen very soon. So I don't know, answer your question, and I also want to cite Google's CEO recently gave a talk in the talk, he mentioned that during the past 2 years, basically overlapping the AI time, the generative AI time, and Google's web searching, web pages went up 20%. So I think this is probably indicator that this is a new technology, this is a new revolution. So a lot of people rush to explore it and all that and publish guides and this and that. So you can see the guys actually AI arise, but web also arise. But he also continued that this may not be but a but web web form, the web like not library web, just web will probably not the only platform. As the agent robot appear, and a lot of the web will not be the only devices people use to get answer. So keep an iPhone or robot or something is not web. So that's my general understanding. I don't know there's a much difference that I couldn't answer the difference between Gemini and Google overview.
I think
So,
it's pulling from all the same data, right?
yeah.
Just different processes.
Yeah.
Tim?
Thanks for all of you for presenting today. I'm not sure if I have a question here, but since we're talking about AI and we're also talking about fair use, how do we think fair use is being affected by AI? Because it seems like just like the copyright laws are just being shredded by AI. So I don't know if it's a question or just if anyone has any comments on that. It just seems like all of this stuff is changing so rapidly.
Well, I can say, unfortunately, there's no, I guess, set answer right now because in the US, most of our decisions regarding fair use, like what courts, I guess, like how fair use is interpreted, is decided by case law. And unfortunately, right now, there's like 35 cases going on involving generative AI and fair use. So it'll be a while before that is, decided.
I feel like there's this tension because, you saw how many LibGuides and FAQ sites were used. At least they were cited, but not all the AIs will give you the links to the sources. So, our content is out there and available, and that's great for users. I'm not sure how great it is for like us in terms of the AI companies and, kind of what they're doing with it and their ultimate goals.
Annie has a question for Bruce, just a question for fun. Do you have any favorite podcasts that you would like to recommend to faculty, or maybe a few favorites relevant for different academic disciplines? Very cool. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, so this is the part I'm not supposed to admit where I'm not a big podcast person. The vast majority of podcasts I listen to are Dungeons and Dragons Let's Plays, not necessarily all of the professional updates. There are some that when I run across them, I will actually listen to. But for the most part, well, there are some faculty I would recommend some of the podcasts I listen to, but not in general.
Very cool. Thanks, Bruce.
I just popped the recommendation in the chat, library leadership. I had to look it up because I listen to it when it seems relevant to me. The host, when we're talking about like AI and ChatGPT and stuff, the host, an actual human person, I like Googled her, sounds like an AI person when she's talking. It sounds so like her voice is so robotic and it almost turns me off. Like it's almost like newscaster robot transatlantic. Like today we're talking about lightning rounds and our host is like it's too much, but it is actually really good content when you can get past it. Real human. I looked. Yeah, like I'm not sure if I'm down with the AI reading, but just a few minutes left. Feel free to ask any more questions. I did just drop the survey in the chat. Please fill out our surveys. We appreciate all of your feedback. Joseph put an updated slide deck for his case study. Yeah, if there are no more questions, then I would say thank you again to all of our presenters. Lightning rounds are fantastic. And that's all we got for you. I hope everyone has a good next session. Hope to see you in one of the rooms. And thank you all again.